Hey there, Video Insiders. This is Carlos and Tom. We're back for another podcast. Tom, you're back from VidCon London.
Hello. Yes, I wouldn't say I was back. I never really left. It's in my hometown, which is really cool. Just a short tube journey away. But back in office, shall we say, and following up with all of the cool people that I met at VidCon. Top tip there, make sure if you meet anyone cool that you follow up as soon as you can when you get back. But we'll be sharing more of our conferencing tips later in the episode. How was your week, Carlos?
My week was busy, but not as busy as this week's going to be. I'm actually jumping on another podcast right after this and planning our first guest podcast mid this week. And it'll be a solo cast because you're not around. But you might notice for our regular listeners, we're switching things up in terms of the intro. I thought it would be a good idea to not always bombard everybody with like how awesome we are and just say, hey, you're getting to know us. And if you want to know who we are, check us out on videoinsiders.fm or listen to some of our older podcasts where we do say, you know, how awesome we are and how many billions of views we've done over the last many years. Tom, who is supporting our podcast this week?
As always, we have to start with a massive thank you for our great friends over at TubeBuddy.
TubeBuddy gives you the tools to boost subscribers, views, and engagement. I love TubeBuddy's copy-paste feature, the ability to mass update all your videos in one fell swoop is my go-to tool for TubeBuddy.
And if you are not using TubeBuddy yet, 1, are you crazy? 2, you need to get on it, and you can do that and get a unique discount by visiting www.videoinsiders.fm/TubeBuddy.
We'll also put the link to this offer in our show notes. Tom, what are we talking about this week?
Well, since I've just, quote unquote, got back from VidCon, I thought it'd be really good to talk about VidCon London, but generally about video conferences and how useful they are or not. You know, in the run-up, I was helping to promote the event as much as possible, and I was getting a lot of emails, and I get emails about a lot of events saying, do you think it's worth coming? Should I get a ticket? So I thought it'd be good for us to break down what goes down at these events for people that have never attended one before, which ones we think are slightly better value for money, and what's changed over the last few years in terms of these video events.
Yes, I will always appreciate VidCon. I've only been once to the Anaheim, the OG location, but I was going to say I always appreciate because that was the first time that we met.
It was indeed. I was thinking about it today. We were both trying to speak to Jeremy Vest at exactly the same time and realized that we knew each other. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's funny. We were fangirling on that during that.
Yeah, and if you're listening to this, Jeremy, we love you still.
Yeah, I mean, for me, VidCon was, as somebody who, you know, had been working on YouTube for many years, I was sort of like always like in awe of that conference, and I wanted to go. I have to admit that, you know, it was a little bit, you know, overwhelming at the time because, you know, like I was seeing all these people that I was following and, you know, being inspired from that were, you know, in a way teaching me how to build strategies for YouTube by looking at these creators. You know, I just ended up being completely overwhelmed. All my senses were overwhelmed that time I went. I haven't gone in 3 years at this point, and I think it's gotten crazier in terms of like volume and amount of people there. When was the last time you went to the Anaheim one?
The Anaheim one was probably 2 years ago. So I think I went a year since you went. I've been a couple of times, again, like you. It's just mind-blowing how big it is, how much noise and how much activity is going on. Great location, right next to Disneyland. Really cool venue. Great how there's lots of activities going on outside. And for me as well, sunshine, which is always good for a business trip. If I can get some sunshine, that's always great. But yeah, I've been twice. Once, my first time I was actually speaking on a panel, second time not, despite trying my best. But both of those times I was working for BBC Studios at the time. So I was kind of on the company's dime, but also on the company's time. So taking meetings and making sure that my time was being used as much in the benefit of the business as possible. And that's very different now that I go to a conference. And this is probably something we'll talk about a little bit later, I suspect.
Yes. I would say my experience was sort of, strange. On one end, I was just as much a fan of the creators. So I wanted to, there's a couple of creators that were there that are actually my friends, and I wanted to hang out with them. And then they're super busy. This is work for them. So we couldn't really hang out too much. I found I got a lot of value from it because of the networking, the people I got to meet. I got to meet Daryl Eves very quickly, introduce myself. I've never been a person to put myself out there. This is why, we've had that discussion of like why I don't have a YouTube channel. I'm much more of a behind the scenes type of person. So, it was just really, really great to sort of network on that level. I definitely got more out of it from the creator track and industry track. Which one's the public one?
The public one is the community track.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, okay, yeah. At all costs, in terms of people like us, avoid the community track. It is not meant for you. It is meant for the fans, and you will be overwhelmed by the insanity.
Having said that, I do think it is important to go and see it, just to see the power of these creators, because you see firsthand. You see people on a video and you see the view counts, but you don't really see the effect that has on real person in the real world. But when you see hordes of teenage girls out trying to ambush someone and crying because they've seen their favorite creator and just screams and all sorts, you just see what a massive effect these creators actually have in the real world on real people. The anecdote that I always like to tell is that because I was a speaker, I was staying in the hotel, which is kind of joint to the convention center. And this is before, for better or worse, probably for worse, this is before security got really tightened up around creators. And you could come and go from the hotel whether you were a guest or not. There was maybe 3 or 4 young females under 15 that, instead of going and enjoying the convention, were pretty much camped out in the elevator all day waiting for a creator to get on the lift. It was just crazy. I'd get in the elevator and the look of disappointment on their faces was very, very clear that I wasn't a famous creator.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't mean it in that way. I meant in the fact of like, obviously you can't avoid the community craziness, right? Looking at it from a distance, after 1 or 2 experiences, I'm like, okay, that's not my scene. I'm not going to run after anybody. But I agree. You do have to witness this to realize the power of it. I would say my greatest experience, I guess, would be being able to sneak into the YouTube party the one time I went, and just having conversations with creators that I knew, creators that I admired, and they were all there just having a great conversation and drinks. And, the YouTube party is like the biggest party of VidCon. At the end of the day, like that's all the fluff of the conference. We're more interested in the meat and potatoes, the stuff that we learn from it, the networking that we do from it. So we have experience, you have multiple experiences at Anaheim. I had one, and you've just been back from VidCon London. What's the difference?
Oh yeah, there's definitely a massive difference between VidCon Europe, VidCon Anaheim, and then pretty much any other video conference as well. And it's just the scale. I think the total amount of people each day at Anaheim is probably about 27,000. Whereas in, Amsterdam, you were probably looking at maybe a couple of thousand, maybe a bit more the first year that they had the community track. They got rid of that in the second year of Anaheim, the second year of Amsterdam, I believe, and which I spoke at last year, and which was really small and intimate, but really cool actually. And then London again, and they brought back the community track, so a lot bigger than Amsterdam. And I think definitely a good business choice to move that from Amsterdam to London, which I would say is probably the YouTube capital of Europe, but still nowhere near in terms the size and scale. Also, probably without wanting to disrespect anyone, any creators that were there in London, and we had like Rhett and Link and a few other names, I don't think they probably had the same level or at least volume of kind of big name creators that they would have at the flagship Anaheim event.
Yeah, I mean, Anaheim is what, 10 years going at this point, at least.
Yeah, probably something like that. Yeah.
So, I mean, first year conferences, as somebody who, again, I'm no expert in terms of conferences, but I've also I've had clients that had conferences, ran conferences. And from what I've seen, and this is just anecdotal experience, is that the native, location, the one where you've done it for 5, 10, 15 years, will always be the top line area. And then, they always try to sort of expand to new cities, but that expansion is not overnight. It takes another few years. Just for Laughs is a great example for my job. Is Just for Laughs is huge in Montreal. During the summer, there's a 2-week festival dedicated for Just for Laughs.
Wow.
The streets are closed. It's some of the top comedians in the world come to the city. It's all about comedy, right? We're not talking about the gags here. We're talking about stand-up comedy, theater comedy, everything's going around in the city. But for many years, they've tried to expand it beyond it. And even here in Toronto has a Just for Laughs festival, and it pales in comparison to Montreal. And we're in the same country. Right?
Yeah.
I just had a coffee with my ex-colleague at Just for Laughs this past week, and he's talking about how resources are like 0 to nilch compared to Montreal. Toronto is a city that is 2 to 3 times bigger than Montreal, where I'm from. There's a lot more money. There's a lot more things happening. There's a lot more culture around comedy. But for some reason, Just for Laughs does not break out the same way it does in Montreal because of its native city. So I would think VidCon will take some time if it continues to do things outside of Anaheim. Do you think it's changed since Viacom bought it? Because just to give you a history, for those who don't know what VidCon is, it was founded 10 years ago by the Green brothers, which are very famous YouTubers, content creators, writers. I think a little bit over a year ago, Viacom bought it.
Yeah, it's still the same people running it. So Jim Louderback is still running the show. Does such an excellent job. In terms of the industry track, it's our good friend Mark Robertson that's still pretty much taking the lead on that. So it's still the same people, still the same ethos. The biggest change that I've seen so far, really, and have in mind that I didn't go to Anaheim since it's changed over to Viacom, is that it moved from Amsterdam to London. And I think that's a major strategic change, and I think it's a really smart change. I'm not sure of the original reasons, but I think it was more about fairness of travel for people in Europe and how central Amsterdam is. Maybe there was some element of not wanting to step on Summer in the City's toes, and Summer in the City is another YouTube celebration, summit, festival, whatever you want to call it, based in exactly the same venue in London, the Excel Centre. But then a company like Viacom, who are probably going to run it more as a business rather than worrying too much about hurting creators' feelings about who travels from where, they've moved it to London, which makes perfect sense. Most of the big companies that have some YouTube presence have a presence in London. The biggest creators in Europe based in the UK, and they get exported further and wider than other European non-English speaking YouTubers or creators. And I think it makes real sense to be in London. It makes commercial sense, and that's the biggest change. And really, it should have been in London from the start. I think they've probably lost a bit of momentum going over to Amsterdam and then having to then lose some of that momentum of, like you said, they're going to take time to find their feet, iron out the bugs, make changes to logistics and settings, and down to little things like where do you serve lunch and how big is the networking lounge, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So they've probably missed out on a bit of that kind of head start that they would have had.
Very true. I think I'm not so sure the model of changing conference from location to location is great. Many sort of public conferences, right? I've heard of huge industry conferences that every year go to a different place in the world, but they're huge industry conferences. The difference over there is the audience can afford to travel wherever they go, and it's expensed. Where, VidCon is a public event for the most part, and, the creator or a fan can't just go, oh, I want to go to VidCon Amsterdam tomorrow, or I want to go to London tomorrow, or I want to go to, thing tomorrow. So again, this is sort of anecdotally from conferences with clients that I've seen sort of expand, is that there's sort of like a DNA of a conference from its original location that can't always be brought to its new location, and it really needs to adapt to the audiences over there, right? The way people think, the way, the creators are, the way the businesses are. So I think that it's never going to be an overnight success. Other comment that I wanted to say is that I totally fangirl over Jim Lauterbach. Me and him go way back, even though I've hardly spoken to him, but I would say, close to 10 years ago when I was sort of shopping around just for laughs with MCNs, I was talking to him at Revision 3. I remember seeing him in podcasts. He used to be on this podcast network that I really love called the Twit Podcast Network. He would be on with Leo Laporte. And I totally respected his vision, the way he approached things. And about, I would say 2 years ago, he was in Toronto for his conference called Influence This. And I was lucky enough to go, and he was right there. And I said, "Hey, how's it going?" And I introduced myself, and I said, "Hey, do you remember Just for Laughs?" And his eyes lit up, and he totally remembered me. And it was really cool to sort of geek out with him for a few minutes. Anyways, enough name dropping.
No, he's a great guy, and I think he was also on James Creech's podcast, All Things Video, recently, and he was speaking about the transition from independent organization over to Viacom. And it was really interesting about Viacom's ambitions and Viacom's reasons for wanting to have the conference. So I definitely recommend people listen to that, and we'll link up to that in the show notes.
I've mentioned it before, but you can say it yourself in terms of anybody that wants to go to VidCon from our perspective, not from obviously the community perspective, from people like us who manage big YouTube channels, what they should plan or do when they go to VidCon.
Yeah, so for me, the value is not so much in the talks, without being big-headed. There's not much that the likes of me and you can be taught from a tactical level. Although having said that, I saw a really good talk this year from somebody called Justin Briggs, I believe his name is. Apologies if I got that wrong. Really interesting kind of SEO-based angle from a traditional Google SEO about how to rank YouTube videos in Google. Really, really interested. And I caught up with him afterwards. That was really great. But generally, I find myself going to less and less of the talks. And I think the real value is in the hallways, what I like to call the hallway track. So meeting people for lunch, for dinner, in the industry lounge. When I first went to VidCon, I would sit in the corner and pretend to be working or pretend to be on my phone and hope not to be too awkward. Whereas now I'm kind of like a real awkward networker. And if you're anywhere in the vicinity of me and look like you're alone, I will approach you and ask you what you're doing here and how and I find that I meet so many interesting people that way by just getting out of your comfort zone, saying hello to people. But yeah, the real value is in the networking, whether it's VidCon or VidSummit, wherever it is. Really kind of serendipitous things can happen when you're talking to people and building these relationships. If it's not with the person you're speaking to directly, it might be that they introduce you to somebody that goes on to make something really valuable in the future. Or in terms of now on the other side, finding clients, it's pretty invaluable to just be spending your time networking rather than sitting and pretending to take notes in talks or flicking through Twitter or whatever it may be. Would you say that's a fair point from your perspective?
Totally fair point. I think one of the biggest missteps or missed opportunities when it comes to conferences is organizing or having much more of a structure to help people network better. Many conferences, and I think even VidCon does, I remember South by Southwest does the same as, you create your online profile on their website and people can connect with you and all that sort of stuff. And that feels so forced on that level of things. One of the best examples I've seen or I've experienced is a conference in Montreal called C2. They partnered with a startup and they created what we call brain dates, is where you would set up a time and meet up with people you want to meet up with. You just look them up on the website and say, hey, let's meet for a quick brain date. Everybody's in line and we just have a coffee, we sit down, we talk about what we do, and we just introduce ourselves. And I'm not saying it's an easy thing to do, but I do feel like sometimes we focus too much on the talks, where the hallways are where things happen. And it's exactly the same situation when I went to VidCon. Yes, I loved going to the talks because it was my first time, but I had the most value in the hallways. Same thing when me and Tara went to Vid Summit 2 years ago. We didn't really learn much from the talks, but we met with a lot of people outside. We had like an awesome drinks with the founder of Social Blue Book, Chad, and, just talked about the history of where he's been. And I'm hoping to have him on a podcast one day. And we met other creators, so we just rebuilt that connection and got back in touch with people that, we hadn't seen or only connected online, if you have Twitter and stuff like that. So definitely, I think when it comes to all conferences, when you know your business, when you know what to do, you're not really there to learn, you're there to network.
Yeah, I think as well, the big difference is if you go there as a representative of another company, like I did when I worked at the BBC, they've paid to fly you to LA, which is not cheap from the UK. They've paid for an expensive ticket. Again, industry tickets are not cheap. And so I think there's an expectation that you will come back where you will have soaked up as much information as possible to share with the rest of the team. So you're expected to attend as many talks as possible, take notes, do a debrief. I've done that a number of times, come back from Anaheim. This is what I learned in this talk. This is the new trend. This is what everyone's talking about. TikTok or whatever they're not talking about. Take photos so we know what are the differences on the kind of shop floor, that kind of thing. But really, I don't think that is where the value is for a company. If someone was to send me to a company now, I'd say, I'm not going to come back with a debrief of, who was exhibiting down on the showroom floor. I'm going to come back with 5 contacts that I think can make a dent in our business, or, we can partner with, something like that we can collab with. And I think it's really different now that I'm going as a representative of myself, that it's a totally different experience. I don't feel the pressure to see the talks. This time I made sure to see Gavin McGarry's talk. I think he's a bit of a rock star, and usually he is the highlight of many a video industry, speakers. I made sure to see that. I saw a couple of others, but generally I made a decision to either plot up in the industry lounge and kind of make myself look open to being accosted by strangers or accosting strangers myself. Whereas I had friends from the old industry who were going from talk to talk to talk and didn't seem to be really benefiting it from that much. But then they'd say, I went to the boat party last night and I met all these great, amazing people. And it's like, well, that's what the rest of the conference is like if you're not sat in all of the talks. But as I say, I can understand the pressures that they feel from the company. Another massive difference I'd say as well is attending a conference as a speaker compared to being an attendee. Obviously, you've got a talk to deal with, the worries that come with that. You got to remember your slides and your words and your jokes. But also it means that you're much more likely to be accosted. You're much more likely for people to come up to you and say, oh, I loved your talk, or I've got a question about your talk. And you're certainly more likely to find business from it. So really now I'm probably, most of the events that I go to, if I'm not a speaker, I'm probably not going. That's pretty much my outlook on at least video industry conferences.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm sort of in the same boat as well, because there's no conference out there that's going to really educate me more than I already know. There's definitely a little bit of FOMO when I see everybody there, and I was looking at your posts and your tweets and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, like if I don't really learn from it, it's more of a waste of time. Like I said, we had sort of discussed the opportunity of me going there, but at the same time, like it's a cost, it's time away from the office, it's all this sort of stuff. And when you're running your own business, that means a lot. Now, we're talked a lot about VidCon, but we should talk about, what other conferences out there that is on our radar, we're paying attention to, but maybe not really going to. Should we go? Blah, 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 blah. One that I've gone to, and at the time, I appreciated it much more than VidCon personally, was Vid Summit, was Daryl Eve's conference, the Vid Summit, just because it felt like it was way more advanced in terms of it was way more focused on people managing YouTube channels and setting things up. I'm not saying I got a lot out of it, but it definitely felt like a little bit more in line with everybody in terms of people that were there to build a business, to do something beyond just becoming famous on YouTube. The speakers were much more advanced and less about the fluff, less about the fandom, more about the business of it. I had a great experience going there a couple of years ago.
Yeah, for me, it was genuinely like a game changer for my business. Like, I was the first speaker on the first day, 8 a.m. I thought no one was going to turn up. It was a packed house. It went down really, really well. The audience were really engaged. It seemed like everyone was talking about it, and I couldn't move after that for being stopped. People asking me about my talk and asking about my services. People telling me that they wish they'd gone to my talk instead of other talks. So I think even if I'd wanted to go to some of the other talks, I just couldn't move. I couldn't get to the next talk. So I only went to very, very few. I went to see Gary Vaynerchuk, just really more for the spectacle of it rather than what we're going to learn, because, I listen to his podcast and stuff, so there's not much new that he says generally. And Pat Flynn, because he's an absolute hero of mine. But I have watched a few of the other talks since I've got back on the replays, and I've got to say, you're right, they're so much more advanced than most. Really actionable tips. I'll shout out, one more talk that I did see was from my good friend Kristen Hills, who did a spectacular presentation on the main stage about getting views on YouTube from social media. Really tactical, talked a lot about Pinterest and Pinterest groups and stuff like that. Really, really good. But yeah, a lot more tactical advice. And I think what's really interesting is that it's billed as like a pitch-free seminar. A lot of talks at conferences is just really a big advert for somebody's services or somebody's app or somebody's software.
Yeah.
But here it's genuinely, I'm going to come here, I'm going to tell you all of my secrets, and then come and speak to me afterwards and I'll give you even more secrets. And the audience are like super professional as well. They're all really hungry. They've had to pay for a good heavy price for the ticket. It's not full of like screaming fangirls. A really well-attended conference as well. Very big, very busy, really good space. Honestly, can't recommend it highly enough. If you are a creator, industry-wise, in terms of, big media companies, I think they should probably send their teams there. Not necessarily like the execs, but if you send the people running YouTube channels, Facebook pages, Instagram accounts, if you send those people to a conference like VidSummit, it's going to really, really help your business.
Very true, very true. There's a bunch of other conferences that I'll just mention, but I won't might personally recommend people, again, pros and channel managers go to. Stuff like Playlist Live, even locally in Toronto. I don't know where Playlist Live even happens.
Florida, I believe.
Florida, yes, you're right. Playlist Live is more of a concert than anything else from what it looks like. I've never been, but it's much more like exclusively the community track. The Buffer Festival in Toronto as well. I've been almost every year since it's come. It started off great. It was, it had these industry events over a few years, but it's gotten away from that, and it's become much more of a Hollywood wannabe conference than anything else. Is trying to be about, short films and content, which is not a bad thing. It's just not really in line with what we're trying to do. We're trying to learn. So there's no real learnings coming from it. It just like you said, there's a lot of like self-promotional people there. And, I went last year to a talk that I thought was going to be great, only to realize that it was like some, pardon my French, Gary V wannabe guy that managed a creator and had a sit-down conversation with the creator, and it was totally self-promotional. And it's like, It was sort of like, oh man, why do I need to listen to this person? I literally left. I left the conference. I was like, this is ridiculous. It's pointless. But yeah, like one of the things that I want to sort of address here is branching out of the creator side of things. There are tons of conferences out there that are not specific to online creators, but also will help your strategies and help you learn. Social Media Week is a good one. CVX is a good one. The ones that I want to sort of bring to light that are really outside of the ecosystem when it comes to YouTube is the NAB Show, Streaming Media World, South by Southwest, and NAM. Out of all of those ones, South by Southwest, the one where I have the most experience, I've been at least 3 times. It is chaos. 50,000 people in Austin, Texas. Being able to focus on anything is really tough. But there are some interesting talks there and people outside of the ecosystem. The reason why I bring up these shows is because there are a lot of people that go to these shows that have absolutely no clue how content is being managed on YouTube and often need help. I had a friend reach out to me because he was presenting at the NAB Show. He asked me for some YouTube pointers, and I gave him really basic stuff. You should do a call to action. You should do thumbnails. You should do upload once a month or once a week or whatever. And like, he was like, this is amazing. I've never heard of these strategies. And I'm like, okay, there's obviously a big disconnect there. There are a lot of like people who are creating content, who are managing content, who have absolutely no idea how YouTube works. And you can have an edge by going to these conferences and just start talking about what you do. And trust me, people's eyes will bug out. They're like, what? You can do this on YouTube? You can do content ID on YouTube? I had no idea. Can you help me? Blah, 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 blah. I've had clients, appear out of that just because I've been at places where it's not all focused on creators. It's more focused on content distribution or focused in marketing, just the marketing side of things. South by Southwest is very marketing focused. The world of content and content distribution is totally outside of the world of marketing, and they do not know that that's happening outside of it. So I think those are huge opportunities to network and learn what's important for brands that are there and what they're paying attention to. I recently had a good win with a big client where all I did is I took over an old channel that they had, abandoned, and I switched it over to their new brand. They were beyond impressed about that, right? And it's like, this is normal stuff when you manage YouTube channels. It's not really hard from our perspective, but from them, they have no idea. They think it's really complex. You come out as a hero because they are like, they're busy they're doing other stuff. They're not into your world of management content.
Yeah, I think for people like us that are, in the kind of YouTube and video services industry, this is kind of like the new frontier for us in terms of finding clients and speaking, because you've got kind of fertile ground in which we can talk about things that are not too complex, but for the uninitiated would be like mind-blowing stuff, like you say. So yeah, I think this is definitely going to be kind of even for something like Social Media Marketing World, which is a huge conference, the biggest social media conference in the world. I'm not sure how deep the YouTube track really goes. I've never attended myself, but I just think because you're not getting a pure video audience, I think that you could, probably easier to strike a chord with a kind of a younger, hungrier audience.
Yeah. And again, it's one of those things where, we're so inside our world that we don't realize that the outside world is completely oblivious to what we do. And we need to sort of like, take ownership of that and show how much we're a pro, because you and me talking to a YouTuber's not impressed with what we do, for most of the time, right? Mm-hmm. But it's like you talk to somebody who, their job is just to market a brand on social media or on media campaigns. They have all they know what to do is to put a video, upload a file on YouTube, and then turn it into an ad and then forget about it. That's something that, people are not paying attention to, and they need some expertise in that.
Okay, so I'm going to give you some quick fire questions to wrap up this conversation and hopefully guide people that are maybe on the fence about whether to invest or not in going to a conference this year. So if you were a 13-year-old fangirl, which conference would you be going to?
You have to go to the best one. You have to go to VidCon.
Okay, and if you were say, head of video strategy for a media company, which conference would you go to?
I would still go to VidCon, but obviously the industry track. But, I would add VidSummit to that list as well.
And if you were an independent creator, let's say you had 250,000 subs, selling a few t-shirts, doing okay, which conference would you go to?
VidSummit, because there are tons of suppliers and people out there to help you build a business that go to VidSummit that can help you support your channel and bring it to another level. One of the things that I want to bring to light is, and I hope to have him on a podcast one day, is Andrew Edwards, who I met at VidSummit when I went. He's a tech YouTuber. He's a little bit like, MKB and Marquez Brownlee. He doesn't have 1 million followers. He has like a couple 100,000, but he's doing really well with his, a couple 100,000 subscribers. He's just networked himself really well. And he was sort of the perfect example of somebody that knows how to create a business beyond just getting views. So yeah, like that's where I would say VidSummit is very valuable.
And final question, of all the conferences that you are aware of, which is a conference that you would go to that you've never been to before?
Oh man, I would say the NAB Show, because it's sort of like the TV industry show. Anybody who works behind the scenes in the TV, like editing and video production and all that sort of stuff, they go to that NAB Show. Everybody talks about the NAB Show. And also streaming media world. I've been subscribed to their YouTube channel for many, many years. And it's like so insider baseball stuff of like how content's being distributed, how Netflix algorithm works and all that sort of stuff. That's like really high level talks. They don't really talk much about YouTube, but if there's one thing, like YouTube is YouTube, but it's always good to know how the traditional people are approaching this world. And I would say streaming media world is almost that marriage of traditional and digital, where all the traditional companies are there trying to learn how this streaming ecosystem is evolving and trying to build these platforms. I would bet they all want to become their own little YouTube. So if you go there with your YouTube knowledge, they might pick your brain and talk to you.
Really, really interesting choices. So I think that puts a lovely bow on top of our conversation today. We want to hear from you. Tweet us at Video Insiders or email us hello@videoinsiders.fm. What conferences should we be going to? Where would you love to come and say hi to us? We're working on some plans to maybe even do some live episodes from some conferences in the future. So please get in touch.
Awesome. This was a fun episode to talk about.
Yes. And of course, we cannot go without saying a huge thank you to our sponsors at TubeBuddy, who usually do have presence at places like VidCon and VidSummit. You can go and speak to Philip, the guys at the booth. They'll do all sorts of demonstrations and stuff. And remember, if you would like to get a unique discount on a multi-channel license for TubeBuddy, you can do so by visiting www.videoinsiders.fm/TubeBuddy.
Awesome. Yeah. When you mentioned that, I just realized I met Phil for the first time at VidCon as well.
Yeah, me too.
Thanks, Tom. Have a great week. I think you're traveling this week, right?
I am. I'm off to LA to film my first course, which I mentioned in the previous episode. So thanks, everyone. Thanks, Carlos. Remember to leave us a review in the podcast app of your choice and tell a friend too, please.
Awesome. Have a great week.
Bye.